The fluorescent lights hummed above Dr. Sarah Mitchell as she pressed her stethoscope against Thomas Whitmore's back. Her hand froze. The blue line snaking up his spine wasn't just swollen, it was moving, pulsing, independent of his heartbeat. "Mr. Whitmore," she whispered, her voice cracking, "when did this start?" Tom's weathered face remained expressionless, a mask perfected over 53 years. "Thought it was a varicose vein, like my father had." Dr. Mitchell pressed harder, felt something push back against her fingers, something alive. Her stethoscope clattered to the floor. "Oh, my God!" She stumbled backward, eyes wide. "We need an OR now." Margaret Whitmore gripped her husband's hand. "What is it? What's wrong with him?" The doctor's mouth opened, closed. How do you tell a wife that her husband of 46 years has been carrying death itself, wrapped in silence? Beneath his skin? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. 8 weeks earlier, on a Monday morning, in late September, Thomas Whitmore noticed the blue swelling on his left calf while buttoning his dress shirt. The shirt was pale blue, the same one he'd worn every Sunday for 46 years, ever since Margaret Baker became Margaret Whitmore on a humid June afternoon in 19... Tom was 68 now, a retired civil engineer who'd spent 40 years building bridges across North Carolina. His hands were weathered, his silver hair still military short, and his morning routine hadn't changed since Vietnam, awake at 5:30. Coffee black. Sam Cooke's "You Send Me" on the kitchen radio. He touched his lower back as he stood, a habit so ingrained he didn't notice it anymore. A habit 53 years old. The blue line on his calf looked perfectly straight, not branching like normal veins should. When he pressed it, the skin felt warmer than it should. He stood differently that morning, favoring his right leg, and Margaret noticed. She always noticed, but she said nothing. Respecting the silence that had defined their marriage, the unspoken agreement that some doors remained closed, some questions unasked. Margaret was 66, a former elementary school teacher with patient eyes and lavender-scented hands. Every Saturday she baked cornbread at dawn, filling their wooden house by Lake Lure with the smell of home. At dinner each evening, she set 4 places at the table, though only 2 were ever filled. The third chair had been empty for 20 years since their son David died in 2004, 28 years old, an Iraq War veteran who couldn't outrun his demons. The 4th was for their daughter. Emma Whitmore was 41, an internal medicine physician at Mission Hospital in Asheville. She had her father's gray-blue eyes and his ability to compartmentalize pain into neat, manageable boxes. 8 months divorced her ex-husband's parting words still echoed, "You're just like your father, emotionally unavailable." She lived alone in a downtown condo with bare walls except for her medical certificates. In her wallet, she carried one photo herself at age 8, sitting on Tom's shoulders, both of them smiling. It was the last photo where her father looked truly happy. Emma hadn't visited home in 6 months. The distance wasn't geographic. It was the 20 years since David's funeral, where Tom stood stone-faced and dry-eyed while Emma sobbed against her mother's shoulder. Some silences couldn't be bridged, even by a man who'd spent his life building them. Tom looked at the blue line again, dismissing it with the same efficiency he'd dismissed everything else that hurt. Varicose vein. he told his reflection. Dad had them too. He pulled on his pants, limped slightly to the kitchen, and poured Margaret her coffee exactly the way she liked it. 2 sugars, cream to the brim. Love, he'd learned, didn't need words, just presence, just routine, just glance. By Wednesday morning, the blue line had migrated. Tom discovered it while shaving, tracing a path from his calf to mid-thigh. He pressed his fingers against it, felt the unnatural warmth radiating through the skin. A muscle twitch. He told himself, nothing more. He limped to his workshop behind the house, where tools hung in perfect rows and sawdust carpeted the floor. An unfinished birdhouse sat on the workbench, started the week after David died, abandoned when every stroke of the sandpaper brought his son's face to mind. Tom hadn't touched it in 20 years, but he couldn't bring himself to throw it away either. At 2 a.m. on Friday, Tom woke to burning. The blue line had reached his lower back, snaking along his spine like a river finding its course. He slipped from bed, careful not to wake Margaret, and stood before the bathroom mirror. The fluorescent light made the discoloration stark against his pale skin. He touched it, felt something beneath the surface that made his stomach turn. He thought of Da Nang, of heat and mud and the weight of things that never left you. Saturday morning, Margaret found compression socks in the trash. She said nothing, but her hands trembled slightly as she mixed the cornbread batter. That afternoon, while Tom was in the shower, she stood outside the bathroom door, listening to his sharp intakes of breath, the sound of water hitting tile, the silence where words should be. By Sunday evening, Tom was sleeping on the floor. Margaret found him there at midnight, curled on the hardwood beside their bed, his shirt soaked with sweat. Tom. Her voice was gentle but firm. This has to stop. It's nothing, Maggie. Just my back acting up. Your back has been acting up for 53 years. She knelt beside him, her knees protesting. I've never asked. You know I've never asked, but I'm asking now. He looked at her, really looked, and saw the accumulated weight of decades in her eyes. All those nights she'd woken to his screams and pretended sleep. All those times she'd watched him touch his back and said nothing. All the questions she'd swallowed for the sake of peace. I can't, Maggie. Then I'm calling Emma. Don't. His voice was sharp, military. She needs her father, and you need help. Margaret stood, her decision made. This is bigger than your pride. Tom Whitmore. The phone call happened Monday morning. Emma was between rounds, standing in the hospital corridor with a cup of coffee going cold in her hand. Your father is being stubborn about something, Margaret said carefully. Emma's throat tightened. She hadn't heard her mother's voice in 2 months. What kind of something? A medical something. He won't see anyone. It's getting worse. The physician in Emma activated, cool, clinical, distant. What are his symptoms? Swelling? Pain? He's sleeping on the floor now, and Emma, Margaret's voice dropped. He's scared. I can see it. Your father is scared, and that terrifies me more than anything. Emma stared at the sterile white walls, at the framed certificates proclaiming her competence, her expertise, her ability to heal everyone except the people who mattered most. I'll come Saturday. Thank you, baby. After hanging up, Emma sat in the doctor's lounge and let herself feel it, the anger, the fear, the guilt that had lived in her chest since David's funeral. the last time she'd really talked to her father. She'd been 16, and he'd missed her piano recital because he couldn't sit in the crowded auditorium. She'd found him in the parking lot afterward, hands gripping the steering wheel, face pale. "Too many people," was all he'd said. She hadn't understood then. She wasn't sure she understood now. That night, Tom woke at 3 in the morning, unable to breathe. The blue line had reached his neck, visible above his collar, pulsing with a rhythm that matched nothing in his body. Margaret woke to his gasping, found him sitting on the edge of the bed, one hand clutching his throat. She didn't ask permission this time. She dialed 911. "No," Tom tried to say, reaching for the phone. "Maggie, don't—" But she held it away, her voice steady as she gave the dispatcher their address. "My husband needs an ambulance. He's 68, difficulty breathing, visible swelling tracking from his leg to his neck. Yes, we'll be outside." Tom looked at her, betrayed and relieved in equal measure. "I've waited 53 years, Margaret said quietly, helping him to his feet. "I'm not losing you to silence now." The sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. The ambulance ride felt both eternal and instantaneous. Tom lay on the gurney, oxygen mask fogging with each rapid breath, while Margaret gripped his hand with a fierceness that surprised them both. It was the first time in decades he hadn't pulled away from touch. The paramedic, checking his vitals, frowned at the monitor. "Sir, your blood pressure is erratic. Heart rate's irregular, too." Through the medication haze, Tom saw David's face reflected in the ambulance window, 28 forever, wearing his dress uniform, eyes asking questions Tom had never answered. "I'm sorry," Tom whispered. I'm sorry, honey. Sorry for what?" Margaret leaned closer. "Everything. Da Nang, the letter, the bullet." The paramedic made a note, patient confused, possible shock. But Margaret's hand tightened. These weren't random words. These were pieces of a puzzle she'd been assembling for 53 years without knowing what picture they'd form. The blue line was visible above Tom's collar now, pulsing like a second heartbeat. His blood pressure dropped. The siren's wail seemed to come from far away. When the ER doors burst open at 3:47 in the morning, organized chaos erupted around them. Nurses, residents, someone calling for Dr. Mitchell. Margaret was ushered to a waiting area, her hand torn from Tom's. She stood alone under fluorescent lights, still wearing her nightgown under her coat, and prayed for the first time in months. Dr. Sarah Mitchell arrived within minutes, her dermatology expertise requested for the unusual presentation. At 42, she'd seen thousands of patients, every skin condition imaginable. She approached Tom's gurney with professional confidence. "Mr. Whitmore, I am Mitchell. When did the swelling start?" Tom's eyes were half closed, pain etched into every line of his face. "Week ago, maybe 2. Any recent injuries, insect bites, travel?" "No." "Medical history, surgeries?" Tom's jaw tightened. "Nothing recent?" Margaret appeared in the doorway, a nurse trailing behind her. "He was in Vietnam, 1970 to 1972. Mitchell's interest sharpened. "Where specifically?" Tom's eyes opened fully, suddenly alert. "Da Nang, near the air base?" "May I examine you?" Tom nodded, and Mitchell's skilled hands traced the blue line from his neck down his spine. She palpated gently, feeling for fluid, for clots, for anything that matched her medical training. Then she felt it something beneath the skin that shouldn't be there. Not fluid, not tissue, something solid, something that moved. She pressed her stethoscope against his back, listening. There was a sound beneath his heartbeat, a separate rhythm, something that made her blood run cold. "That's not possible," she breathed, pressing harder. The thing pushed back against her fingers. "Doctor." Mitchell dropped the stethoscope, stepping backward so quickly she nearly fell. "We need imaging. Now. Page Dot Sullivan. Tell him it's urgent." Emma arrived as they were wheeling Tom toward radiology. She'd been halfway to Asheville when her mother called about the ambulance. Now she stood in the ER corridor, in jeans and a Duke sweatshirt, her medical badge clipped to her belt out of habit, watching orderlies rush her father past. "Mom." She found Margaret in the waiting area, small and frightened in a way Emma had never seen. They embraced, something they hadn't done in years. "What's the working diagnosis?" Emma asked, slipping into doctor mode because it was easier than being a daughter. Dr. Mitchell emerged from the trauma bay. "I don't know, but there's something alive under his skin, something that responds to pressure, that has its own pulse." Emma's medical training warred with her rising panic. "That's impossible." "I know what I felt." In the ultrasound room, a technician ran the probe over Tom's back. The screen flickered, and a long, thin shadow appeared, dense, foreign. Definitely not organic tissue. Emma stood beside the monitor, her professional mask cracking. "That's not a blood clot. That's not a tumor. What is it?" Margaret pressed against the observation window. "Someone tell me what's happening to my husband." On the screen, as the probe moved, the shadow seemed to coil, to shift position in response to the pressure. Tom, sedated now, mumbled through the drugs. "It's been there since someone thought it dissolved, thought my body ate it." Dr. Mitchell leaned closer. "Mr. Whitmore, what's been there?" But Tom had slipped back into unconsciousness. At 5:30 in the morning, Dr. Robert Sullivan arrived, 54 years old, former Navy medic, now a trauma surgeon known for seeing what others missed. He wore a leather jacket over his scrubs, his gray beard and intense eyes giving him the appearance of someone who'd witnessed too much. He studied the imaging in silence arrays, ultrasound, the CT scan they'd rushed through. His expression wasn't confusion, it was recognition. "How long have you had this, Mr. Whitmore?" Tom's sedated eyes opened slightly. 53 years, 4 months, 18 days. Sullivan nodded slowly. "That's very specific." "You don't forget the day you get shot by your own lieutenant." The room froze. Margaret's gasp cut through the silence. Emma's whispered, what seemed to echo forever. Sullivan leaned over the imaging again. "It's a bullet fragment, but that's not the problem." He pointed to the screen. "The problem is what your body's been doing to it for 5 decades. You've been fighting a war inside yourself, Mr. Whitmore, and now your body is losing." "Doctor." Sullivan led them to a small conference room as dawn broke over Asheville. Margaret and Emma sat across from him, a table between them covered with CT scans and lab results. Tom was being prepped for emergency surgery, but Sullivan insisted they understand first. "The imaging shows two objects," he said, pointing to the screen. "The bullet fragment we expected it, and this." He indicated a smaller cylindrical shape adjacent to the metal. "This is a military message capsule. Standard issue, circa kilos." Emma's medical training couldn't process this. Inside his body, soldiers swallowed them before dangerous missions. If you died and your body was recovered, your family would get the letter inside. A final message. Margaret's hand went to her mouth. He thought he was going to die that day. The capsule is stainless steel, designed to survive. But the bullet fragment has been breaking down for 5 decades, releasing metal toxicity into his system. His body encased it in scar tissue, fought to contain it. That blue line you saw, that's the infection pathway. The battle his immune system has been losing. Emma leaned forward, doctor to doctor. Prognosis without intervention. 48 to 72 hours before septic shock. Then multi-organ failure. Margaret's voice was barely audible. And with surgery. Sullivan's face was grave. The bullet is wrapped around a nerve cluster near his spine. There's a 40% chance of paralysis. But without surgery. He didn't need to finish. Emma stood abruptly, walked to the window. "You've carried a letter to us for 53 years. She spoke to her reflection, to the ghost of her father in the glass. "What else haven't you told us?" "Everything, apparently." If Margaret's voice held a devastation Emma had never heard, was our entire marriage built on silence? Sullivan cleared his throat. "He's protecting you. It's what we were trained to do." He paused, making a decision. "My father was in the Pacific, World War II, carried shrapnel until 1980. It shifted, punctured his lung. He died before we could get him to the hospital." His eyes were distant. "He never told us about Iwo Jima either, not one word in 44 years. It's not about trust. It's about not passing the nightmares down." Emma turned from the window, tears on her face for the first time since her divorce. "But the silence is its own nightmare." "I know." Sullivan's voice was gentle. "That's why I became a surgeon. To cut out the things we can't talk about. To save the men who saved us but couldn't save themselves." Blood work showed systemic infection. White blood cell count critically elevated. Tom's fever spiked to 104 degrees. The surgery was scheduled for 4 that afternoon, 8 hours to say things that had gone unsaid for decades. Margaret found herself in the hospital chapel, rosary beads in hands that hadn't held them since David's funeral. The small room smelled of furniture polish and old hymnals. She closed her eyes, and the memories came flooding. She'd met Tom in 1970 at the VA hospital where she volunteered, reading to patients who'd lost their sight or their minds, or both. Tom had been there for a follow-up on his back routine. He'd said, "Just checking that everything healed right from the war." He was quiet, watchful, with eyes that seemed to be looking at something dark beyond the visible world. Their first date, he'd taken her to a movie. Sat in the back row, kept his hand on the exit. When the screen flashed with an explosion, he'd flinched so hard he'd knocked over his soda. He'd apologized 17 times. She'd kissed him on their 3rd date, and he'd cried after. Wouldn't say why. Their wedding day in 1978 had been beautiful. Small ceremony, immediate family only. When he slipped the ring on her finger, his hand had trembled so violently she'd had to steady it with her own. That night at the hotel, their first night as husband and wife, he'd woken at 2 in the morning screaming. She'd held him while he shook, and when she asked what he'd dreamed, he'd said, "Nothing, just old memories." That became their pattern. He would wake, she would hold him, he would say nothing. She learned to love the silence, to find the man beneath it through other means. The way he made her coffee every morning, exact measurements, perfect temperature, the way he built her a bookshelf that fit the exact dimensions of her collection, the way he'd touch her face when he thought she was sleeping, as if memorizing something precious he knew he didn't deserve. When David was born in 1906, Tom had held his son and whispered, "I'm sorry." Margaret had thought he meant sorry for the pain of childbirth, for the difficult labor. She understood now he'd been apologizing for passing something down the weight, the silence, the war that never ended. David had been such a bright child, obsessed with birds, carrying a field guide everywhere. But as he grew, he became quieter, more like Tom. At 18, he'd enlisted despite their protests. "I want to understand," he'd told his father. "I want to know what you can't tell me." Tom hadn't argued. He'd just nodded, and something in his eyes had broken completely. When David died in 2004, the official report said equipment accident, but the unofficial whispers said suicide. Tom hadn't cried at the funeral. He'd stood in his dress uniform, the one he'd kept pressed for decades, and stared at the flag-draped coffin with the same distant look he'd had since 1971. That night, Margaret had found him in the garage, holding David's field guide, finally weeping. But when she'd approached, he'd closed the book, wiped his eyes, and gone back to silence. Now, in the chapel, Margaret prayed, not for Tom's survival, though she wanted that desperately. She prayed for truth, for the man she'd loved for 46 years to finally come home, even if he came home dying. Emma sat in the doctor's lounge, her laptop open to medical journals. She searched embedded foreign objects, late-stage infections, Vietnam War injuries. The statistics were staggering. 58,000 Americans died in Vietnam. Another 150,000 were wounded. But how many came home carrying metal and memories that would kill them decades later? That number was unknown, untracked, lost to silence. She found a case study from 2018, a 70-year-old veteran who died from a resolved bullet wound from 19C8. The fragment had seemed stable for 51 years before suddenly degrading, releasing lead and copper into his bloodstream. By the time he sought treatment, it was too late. Emma's hands shook as she read, "This could have been David. This could have been her father years ago. This could be her father now." Her phone buzzed. A reminder of David's last voicemail saved in her archives. 3 in the morning. His voice slurred with alcohol or pills or both. "Em, you awake?" "Probably not. You're always working. Like Dad. You know, I think about Dad a lot out here in the desert. It's nothing like Vietnam, but it feels the same. You know, like we're all just pretending we're okay. Do you think Dad understands? Does he ever want to talk about it? I want to talk to him, but I don't know how to start. How do you ask your father if the war ever ends? Call me back." "Okay." "Em, please, call me back." She never had. She'd been in a 14-hour surgery, and by the time she'd checked her phone, there were different messages from police, from her mother, from a military chaplain. Emma closed her laptop and cried in the empty lounge. She cried for David, for her father, for herself, for all the words trapped in silence, for all the phone calls not returned, for all the ways love could fail despite everyone's best intentions. At noon, she splashed water on her face and went to pre-op. Tom lay on the gurney, IVs in both arms, being shaved and prepped for surgery. When Emma entered, followed by Margaret, his eyes cleared slightly from the sedation. "Maggie," he said, and his voice cracked on her name. Margaret took his hand, and this time Tom held on like she was the only thing keeping him tethered to earth. "I'm here, honey." "The cornbread at our wedding," Tom said suddenly. "You burned it." Margaret laughed through tears. "You remember that. I remember everything, every breakfast, every time you waited up for me, every night you pretended not to hear me scream." His eyes found hers. "I didn't deserve you, Maggie. I never said that enough. I never said it at all. Tom, let me say it now, while I can." He turned to Emma, and his face crumpled in a way she'd never seen. "You have my eyes. That's what scared me about you, baby girl." Emma moved closer, taking his other hand. "What do you mean? I saw how you looked at the world, like it could hurt you any second, like you were waiting for the pain, like me." He took a shuddering breath. "Like David. I saw it in both of you, and I didn't know how to fix it because I couldn't fix it in myself, so I stayed away. I thought if I kept my distance, I couldn't make you broken like me." "Dad," Emma's voice broke, "you didn't break us. The silence did. I know that now. 53 years too late, I know." Tears rolled down his weathered face, the first Emma had ever witnessed. "I'm so sorry, baby girl. I'm so sorry for all the years I wasted being afraid. I'm sorry I couldn't save David. I'm sorry I wasn't there for you when your marriage fell apart. I'm sorry for everything I should have said and didn't." Emma collapsed forward, her head on his chest, and Tom's hand came up to stroke her hair like he used to when she was 8 and had nightmares. "It's okay, Daddy. It's okay." "It's not, but maybe." He looked at Margaret. "Maybe if I survive this, we can start over." Margaret kissed his forehead. "We're not starting over. We're starting forward, from here, together." A nurse entered, checking the clock. "Mr. Whitmore, we need to move you in 10 minutes." Tom nodded, then tensed. "Maggie, there's something else in my workshop. Under the floorboard, a metal box." Margaret's breath caught. She'd seen that box once, years ago, when she'd ventured into his space uninvited. He'd been so angry, so protective of it. "The combination is our wedding date, 060-1278. Tom's eyes were urgent now. "If I don't come back, everything's in there, everything I should have told you. Letters, records, the truth about Hayes, about what happened in Da Nang, about David." "You're coming back," Margaret said fiercely, "so you can show me yourself. But if I don't, Tom Whitmore, you listen to me." She leaned close, her face inches from his. "I'll open that box when you come back. We'll open it together. You're going to show me every piece of paper, every secret, every scar. You're going to talk, and I'm going to listen, and we're going to have all the time we should have had 50 years ago. Do you understand?" Tom nodded, tears still flowing. Dr. Sullivan entered, surgical scrubs on, cap in hand. "It's time." As they wheeled Tom toward the operating room, he called back, "It's Emma." She walked alongside the gurney. "Yes, Dad, the birdhouse in my workshop, the one I never finished." His voice was fading with the sedation. "Help me finish it when I get back for David." "Yeah, Dad, we'll finish it together." The OR doors swung closed, and Margaret and Emma stood in the empty corridor, holding each other up. Through the small window, they could see the surgical team positioning Tom, adjusting lights, counting instruments. "Did you know," Emma asked quietly, "about any of it?" Margaret shook her head. "I knew there was something. I always knew. But he never wanted to burden me with it, and I never wanted to force him." She looked at her daughter. "Was that wrong? Should I have pushed?" "I don't know, Mom. I honestly don't know." Emma watched through the window as they draped her father. "I stayed away 'cause I was angry he wouldn't talk. But maybe that was just another kind of silence." They moved to the waiting room. Hours stretched ahead. Margaret pulled out her knitting, a blanket in 3 colors. Blue for Tom, green for Emma, red for David. "What's that for?" Emma asked. "For the 3 men I love." Margaret said simply, "David doesn't get to be forgotten just because he's gone. He's part of this family, part of this story." Emma understood then. The 4th place at dinner, the unfinished birdhouse, the way her mother still cooked David's favorite meals on his birthday. Grief didn't mean absence. It meant carrying love forward, even when the person was gone. At 4:17, the OR doors opened. A nurse emerged, family of Thomas Whitmore. They stood together. "The surgery is underway. Dr. Sullivan wanted you to know he's doing well so far." "It'll be several hours." They sat back down. The waiting had truly begun. The surgery stretched from afternoon into evening. Margaret's knitting needles clicked rhythmically. The only sound besides the muted television in the corner and the occasional page turning from Emma's medical journal. Other families came and went: a teenage boy with a broken arm, an elderly woman after a fall, a young mother whose child had swallowed something he shouldn't have. Life continued around them while their world hung suspended. At 7:30, a complication alarm sounded somewhere in the surgical wing. Emma's head snapped up, her medical instincts recognizing the code. Margaret's hands froze mid-stitch. "That could be anyone," Emma said, but her voice lacked conviction. 3 minutes later, a nurse rushed past, and Emma caught the words "OR3" before the door swung shut. "That's Dad's room." Emma stood, her legs unsteady. Margaret rose beside her, the blanket falling to the floor. They moved to the surgical corridor, pressing against the windows, but could see nothing through the frosted glass except shadows moving urgently. Margaret's lips moved in silent prayer. Emma found herself doing the same, words she hadn't spoken since David's funeral. "Please, God, not yet. We need more time." The minutes crawled, 10 in, 15, 20. Then the alarm stopped. The urgent movement inside slowed. Through the window, they saw Dr. Sullivan straighten, saw him nod to his team. Still working, still fighting. "He's okay, Tut." Emma whispered, "He's still okay." They returned to their seats, but the waiting had changed. Before, it had been anticipatory. Now it carried the weight of how close they'd come to losing him. At 9:47, Sullivan emerged. He still wore his surgical cap, and there was blood on his shoes, a detail that made him seem more human, less godlike. Margaret and Emma stood together, holding on to each other. Sullivan's face showed exhaustion and relief in equal measure. "The surgery was successful. We removed the bullet fragment entirely and extracted the capsule intact." But Emma heard it in his pause. There was significant nerve trauma, more than the imaging showed. "I did everything I could to preserve function, but we won't know the extent for 48 to 72 hours. He met their eyes directly. "He may not walk again." Margaret's voice was steady, though tears ran down her face. "But he's alive." "Yes, Mrs. Whitmore, your husband is alive." "Then we'll deal with the rest." She straightened her shoulders, channeling strength she didn't feel. "Can we see him?" "He's in recovery." "Give us an hour to move him to ICU. Then, yes." Sullivan reached into his pocket and produced a sealed medical bag. Inside was a small steel cylinder, tarnished and corroded but intact. "This is yours." Margaret took it with trembling hands. The object weighed ounces but felt impossibly heavy, like holding 53 years of silence compressed into metal. "Should I open it now?" she asked. Emma touched her mother's shoulder. "That's your choice, Mom." Margaret looked at the capsule, at the inscription, visible through the plastic tear. "To Moby." For her maiden name, Valentine's Day, the day he thought he'd die. "No," she said finally. "We open it together. When he wakes up, all three of us." An hour later, they stood beside Tom's ICU bed. Machines beeped steadily, monitoring the life they'd nearly lost. A ventilator tube ran down his throat. It would be removed in the morning if all went well. Bandages covered his back, stark white against the hospital sheets. His face looked peaceful, more peaceful than Margaret had seen it in decades. She took his hand, still warm, and held it between both of hers. "I'm here, honey. I'm not leaving." Emma checked the monitors with professional efficiency. Blood pressure stable. Oxygen saturation good, heart rhythm regular, so all positive signs. But her hands shook as she read the numbers, the physician's mask cracking to reveal the terrified daughter beneath. "His vitals are strong," she said, more to convince herself than inform her mother. "That's a good sign." Margaret nodded, but didn't take her eyes off Tom's face. She began to talk, her voice soft but constant, filling the silence with all the things she should have said over the years. "Remember when you built that swing set for the kids? Took you 3 weeks because the instructions were in Korean. You were so stubborn. Wouldn't let me call anyone for help. Emma was 6, David was 8, and they sat on the porch every day watching you work." She smiled at the memory. "When you finally finished it, David's first swing snapped the chain because you'd attached it wrong. You had to start over, but you didn't complain once." Emma moved to a chair in the corner, giving her mother space but unable to leave. She listened to stories she'd forgotten or never knew, watching her father's chest rise and fall with mechanical precision. "And David's first word," Margaret continued, "it was Dada. You were so surprised. You picked him up and just held him, and you were crying, and you said, I don't deserve this. I don't deserve him. I didn't understand then. I do now. At midnight, Emma left to walk the corridors. She couldn't sit still any longer. Couldn't watch the monitors, count out her father's remaining time without moving. She found herself on the pediatric floor, where a child's cries echoed from one of the rooms. A father's voice soothed, singing softly. Emma leaned against the wall and broke. All the tears she'd held back, all the years of anger and confusion and grief came pouring out in harsh, ugly sobs. A nurse found her in the stairwell 20 minutes later, sitting on the steps with her head in her hands. First time? The nurse asked kindly, sitting beside her. I'm a doctor. Emma managed. I should be able to handle this. Doctors are the worst patients' families. You know too much. You see all the ways it could go wrong. The nurse, her badge said, Linda. 30 years of service patted Emma's knee. Who's in there? My father. He's been carrying a bullet in his back for 53 years, since Vietnam. We just found out today. Linda nodded slowly. My husband was Vietnam too. Came home in 72. Didn't talk about it for 40 years. Then one day, he just started. Couldn't stop. Talked for 3 days straight. And I listened to every word. She stood, offering Emma a hand. Don't waste another minute being angry, honey. You don't know how many you have left. Emma returned to find her mother still talking, still holding Tom's hand. She slipped into the room quietly and sat in the chair by the window. I was just telling your father about your graduation from medical school, Margaret said without looking away from Tom. How he stood in the very back of the auditorium because he couldn't handle the crowd. But I saw his face when they called your name. Pure pride, pure love. He just couldn't show it the way other fathers did. Emma's throat tightened. I thought he didn't care. He cared so much it broke him. That's what I'm learning. Sweetheart, your father's silence wasn't absence. It was fear. Fear that if he loved us out loud, if he let himself be fully present, the war would follow, the nightmares would infect us, the darkness would spread. But it spread anyway, Emma said softly. David got it. I got it. The silence was its own infection. I know, Snell. Margaret finally looked at her daughter. But we're going to cure it, starting now, starting here. When he wakes up, we're going to talk, really talk, and we're not going to stop until we've said everything that needed saying for the last 50 years. At 3 a.m, Tom's breathing changed. The ventilator had been removed an hour earlier, and now his chest rose and fell on its own rhythm. His fingers twitched in Margaret's hand. Tom, she leaned closer. Honey, can you hear me? His eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first. Then finding her face, his lips moved, forming her name without sound. I'm here. Baby, Emma's here too. Tom's gaze shifted, found his daughter by the window. Sweetheart. Emma moved to his bedside, taking his other hand. Hi, Dad. Did I make it? Dr. Sullivan entered as if summoned, checking the monitors. You made it, soldier. Welcome back. He smiled tiredly. That's twice you've survived what should have killed you. I'd say someone up there wants you to finish what you started down here." Tom's eyes found the small sealed bag on the bedside table, the capsule. His face changed, decades of fear flooding back. "Oh, God, that thing." And Margaret picked it up, holding it where he could see. "Tom, it's time." "No." His voice was hoarse but firm. "Please, just throw it away." "Dad," Emma said gently, "you carried this for 53 years. I was 22, a scared kid. It's not who I am now." "Then show us who you were," Margaret said. "Let us know all of you, not just the part you thought we could handle." 3 days passed in careful optimism. Tom showed remarkable progress sitting up, taking sips of water, speaking in full sentences. Physical therapy began on day 2, just wiggling his toes, but each small movement brought tears of relief. Doc Sullivan cautiously upgraded his prognosis from guarded to hopeful. On the 4th night, at 2 in the morning, the monitor screamed. Tom's fever spiked to 105 degrees. His blood pressure crashed. The surgical site, which had been healing cleanly, began bleeding through the bandages. Emma, sleeping in the chair beside him, jolted awake to nurses flooding the room. "What's happening?" Margaret appeared in the doorway, still in her clothes from the day before. She'd been sleeping in the family lounge, refusing to go home. A resident checked the wound, his face grave. "Secondary infection. The site is compromised." Dr. Sullivan arrived within 20 minutes, called from home for the 2nd time in a week. He examined Tom, reviewed the latest scans, and his expression told them everything before he spoke. "There's a fragment we missed, microscopic on the original imaging, but it's causing a cascade infection." He pointed to the new CT scan. "Here, size of a rice grain, adjacent to the spinal cord." Emma studied the image with clinical detachment, fighting through her terror. "That's near the if you slip even a millimeter." "I know." Sullivan's voice was grim. "Paralysis if we're lucky. Death on the table if we're not." "And without surgery?" Margaret asked, though she already knew. "Hours, maybe a day before septic shock." Tom drifted in and out of consciousness, delirious with fever. In his lucid moments, he called for David, his mind trapped somewhere between Vietnam and Iraq, between 1907 and 2004. "David, don't go on patrol," he mumbled, reaching towards something only he could see. "Son, please, don't go. I can't lose you again." Margaret held his hand, tears streaming. "He's not here, honey. David's at peace." No, he's right there. He's saying goodbye." "Why is he saying goodbye?" Emma stepped into the hallway, unable to watch her father unravel. She called her attending, told him she wouldn't be at rounds. Then she stood against the wall and screamed silently into her hands, all the grief and rage and helplessness tearing through her. At 4 in the morning, Tom emerged from the delirium long enough to understand. Sullivan explained the surgery again, the risks, the impossibility of the situation, the razor-thin margin between saving his life and ending it. 50-50 chance, Tom asked, his voice barely audible. "At best." Tom looked at Margaret, at Emma, at the life he'd finally started living. "And if we don't, you have until tomorrow morning, maybe." Margaret gripped his hand so tightly her knuckles went white. "You're going to fight. Do you hear me? You're going to fight." Maggie, listen. Tom's clarity was frightening in its suddenness. The house is paid off. The insurance papers are in the blue folder in my desk. There's money set aside for Emma. The car title is Stop. Margaret's voice broke. You're not going anywhere. But if I do, you're not. She leaned close, her face inches from his. Tom Whitmore, I have waited 46 years for you to truly come home. You do not get to leave now. That's an order, soldier. Tom tried to smile. I always followed your orders, Maggie, even when I pretended not to. Then follow this one. Come back to me. Emma approached the bed, taking her father's other hand. Dad, you promised we'd finish David's birdhouse together. You promised we'd start over. Baby girl. Tom's eyes were wet. You look so much like your mother. Strong, beautiful, brave in ways I never was. Dad, don't. I need to say this while I can. He struggled to sit up slightly. I stayed away because I saw me in you. The sadness, the weight. I thought distance would protect you, but it just made you miss me. I know that now. Too late, but I know. It's not too late, Emma insisted, her voice fierce. Come back and teach me. Show me how to let people in. Show me how to not be afraid of love. Promise me something, Emma. Don't do what I did. Don't run from the people who love you. Talk to them, even when it hurts. Especially when it hurts. I promise. But you have to promise to teach me how. Deal. Tom managed a weak smile, then turned back to Margaret. The metal box in the workshop. The combination is our wedding date. Inside there's a letter from Hayes's widow. I never opened it. Margaret had wondered about that box for decades. Why not? I was afraid. Afraid she'd blame me for his death. Afraid she'd tell me I should have died instead. His breathing labored. If I don't make it back, maybe you could. No. Margaret's voice was steel wrapped in velvet. You're opening it. When you wake up, we're opening it together, and you're going to read it to me yourself. Do you understand? Tom nodded, exhausted. Okay, Maggie, okay. The orderlies came at 5. As they wheeled Tom toward surgery for the second time, Emma walked alongside the gurney. Dad, that birdhouse, we're going to paint it blue. David's favorite color. That sounds perfect, sweetheart. The OR doors closed. Margaret and Emma stood in the empty corridor, the same corridor where they'd stood 4 days ago. History repeating with higher stakes. At 8:23. During the 3rd hour of surgery, the code blue alarm sounded from OR3. Margaret stood, facing the surgical wing. She prayed aloud, her voice steady despite the terror. Please, God, not yet. We need more time. Just a little more time. Emma joined her, sir, praying for the first time since David's funeral. Please, I just got him back. Please don't take him. Behind the doors, they couldn't see Sullivan fighting, couldn't see the monitor's flatline, couldn't see the defibrillator charge. They could only stand and pray and hope that love was enough to call someone back from the edge of everything. The code blue lasted 4 minutes and 37 seconds. Emma counted at every one, her medical training unable to suppress the knowledge of what each passing second meant. Brain damage began at 4 minutes without oxygen. At 5 minutes, the chances of recovery plummeted. At 4 minutes and 37 seconds, the alarm stopped. They waited. The silence was worse than the alarm had been. Margaret swayed on her feet, and Emma caught her, held her up. They stood together, two women who'd loved the same complicated man in different ways, waiting to learn if that love had been enough. Sullivan emerged at 11:15. His scrubs were soaked with sweat, his face gray with exhaustion. But he was smiling. He's alive. Margaret's knees buckled. Emma held her as she sobbed, great heaving gasps of relief that echoed down the corridor. Other families in the waiting room looked up, understanding without words what that particular kind of crying meant. He coded twice on the table. Sullivan continued. His heart stopped, and we had to bring him back. But he's stable now. The fragment is out. The infection source is eliminated. He paused. His heart is stronger than it has any right to be. Stronger than mine would be, after what he's been through. Can we see him? Emma asked. He's in recovery. Give him an hour. Sullivan sat down heavily in the waiting room chair. There's something else you should know. When we were in there removing the fragment, I found evidence of old fractures, ribs that healed wrong, a collarbone that was never set properly, a jaw fracture that mended on its own. He looked at them. None of this is in his medical records. Margaret closed her eyes. More secrets, more pain carried in silence. From Vietnam, Emma asked. That would be my guess. Multiple incidents of trauma, untreated. I can't say for certain without asking him, but the bone remodeling suggests injuries from different times, over months or years. Sullivan stood. Whatever happened to your father over there, it was more than one incident. It was systematic. After he left, Emma turned to her mother. Did you know about any injuries? Margaret shook her head slowly. He flinched sometimes. When I touched his ribs or his shoulder, I thought it was just sensitivity, old age. She looked at her hands. How did I not see it? How did I spend 46 years with a man and not know his body was a map of violence? Because he hid it, Emma said. Because he was trained to hide it. Because that's what they did to survive. An hour later, they stood beside Tom's bed in recovery. He looked smaller than before, diminished by what he'd endured, but he was breathing on his own. And when Margaret took his hand, his fingers tightened around hers. The prognosis remained uncertain. The nerve damage would take days to assess, but he'd survived what should have killed him. And for now, that was enough. 5 days later, Tom was moved to a private room, strong enough to sit up, to eat solid food, to speak without gasping. Margaret had gone home to shower and change, promising to return within 2 hours. Emma sat by the window, catching up on medical journals. When Tom spoke, I need to tell you about the workshop box. Emma set down her journal. Dad, you don't have to. Yes, I do. Before your mother comes back, before I lose my nerve again. He shifted in bed, wincing. In that box, there are things I've never shown anyone. Things from the war. Things about David. Things about me that I'm not proud of. What kind of things? Tom was quiet for a long moment. The Purple Heart. I never displayed because I got it from friendly fire. Photos of my unit. 8 of them are dead. 3 killed themselves after coming home. There's a newspaper clipping about Lieutenant Hayes, the man who shot me, calling him a hero. He was, in the end, just not the way the papers said. Emma moved closer. Tell me what happened. The whole story. So Tom did. For the first time in 53 years. He told someone who wasn't a therapist or a stranger at the VA what had happened in Fuak Bin village on February 14th. He told her about the boy hiding in the floor, about refusing the order, about the sound of Hayes's gun behind him. He told her about the 3 days after, how Hayes had looked at him with shame and guilt and something like gratitude. He told her about the ambush that killed Hayes, how the lieutenant had hesitated before firing, trying to save a villager instead of himself. He died trying to prove he wasn't what he'd become. Tom said, he died trying to be the man he was before fear made him pull that trigger on me, and I've spent 53 years believing I killed him, that if I just followed orders, he'd have lived. Emma's eyes were wet. Dad, that's not, you didn't kill him. The war killed him. Fear killed him. Bad orders killed him. I know that in my head. But my heart, Tom touched his chest, my heart has carried the weight of his death all these years. What else is in the box? A child's drawing from that village. From the boy I refused to shoot. Someone mailed it to me years later, through the VA. On the back, it says in Vietnamese, "Thank you for saving me." I had it translated. I've looked at it maybe 3 times in 50 years, because every time I do, I wonder, did I save him or just delay his death? Did he survive the war? Is he alive now? Did he have a family, or did someone else kill him a week later, and my refusal meant nothing? Emma understood then. The burden wasn't just what Tom had done, but what he couldn't know the outcome of his choices, the ripples spreading beyond his sight. There's also a psychiatric evaluation from 1902. Tom continued, after I got home, they diagnosed me with acute stress reaction and recommended treatment. I declined. He laughed bitterly. Declined, like it was an optional upgrade on a car. I thought I could handle it myself. Thought asking for help was weakness. And David, Emma asked quietly. Tom's face crumpled. There's a letter from David. His last letter to me, sent from Iraq. It arrived the day after we got the news about his death. I never opened it. Emma's breath caught. Why not? I was afraid. Afraid he blamed me for not being there, for not teaching him how to handle what he was seeing. Afraid his last words to me were that he hated me for making him into someone who couldn't feel. Tom wiped his eyes. I couldn't survive knowing my son died hating me. Dad, what if he didn't? What if the letter says something you need to hear? Then I've wasted 20 years being afraid of words that might have healed me. When Margaret returned, Tom told her about the conversation. She listened without interruption. And when he finished, she simply said, then it's time to open everything together. The next afternoon, Margaret drove to the house and retrieved the metal box. She'd avoided the workshop for years, respecting Tom's space, but now she entered with purpose. The floorboard came up easily, as if it had been waiting. The box was heavier than she expected, olive green, military issue, with a combination lock showing years of wear. She entered their wedding date, 06-12-70. The lock clicked open. Inside, exactly as Tom had described, were the pieces of his hidden life. The Purple Heart in its faded case. The photographs of young men who'd never made it past 30. The newspaper clipping about Hayes, yellowed and brittle. The child's drawing, colors faded but still visible, an American soldier giving candy to children, drawn with the hopeful lines of innocence. And the letters, 2 of them. One from Helen Hayes, postmarked December 1971. One from David, postmarked 2 weeks before he died. Margaret drove back to the hospital with the box on the passenger seat, feeling like she was transporting something sacred and terrible at once. That evening, with Tom propped up in bed and Emma sitting beside him, Margaret opened the box on the bedside table. Tom's breathing quickened as each item emerged. "The letter from Hayes's widow first," he said. "I need to know what she thought of me." Margaret's hands trembled as she opened the envelope, brittle with age. The letter inside was written in careful cursive, the handwriting of a woman who'd been taught penmanship in a different era. She read aloud, "Dear Private Whitmore, I received your condolence letter about my husband's death. Thank you for your kind words about Warren. I want you to know something that might bring you peace. 3 days before Warren died, he wrote me a letter, his last letter home. In it, he confessed what he did to you." Tom's face went pale. Margaret continued reading. "He told me he shot a good man for being brave. He said you refused an order to hurt civilians, and he shot you because he was afraid of looking weak in front of the unit. He called himself a coward. He said you were what a soldier should be, and he was what happens when fear overtakes honor." Tom's eyes closed, tears streaming down his face. Margaret's voice wavered, but she continued. "Warren told me he was trying to fix what he'd done, that he was trying to be brave like you were. He said if he didn't make it home, I should find you and tell you the truth. You were not at fault. You saved a boy's life. You kept your humanity when others lost theirs. Warren's last words, according to the men who were with him, were your name, and then, 'Tell him I'm sorry. Tell him he was right.'" The letter concluded, "Mr. Whitmore, my husband died with honor, trying to correct his dishonor. You survived for a reason. Please live fully for both of you. With respect and gratitude, Helen Hayes." Tom sobbed openly. 53 years of guilt pouring out in great heaving gasps. Emma held one hand, Margaret the other, and they let him cry until there was nothing left but exhaustion and the beginning of something that might one day become peace. 6 weeks after the second surgery, Tom took his first steps without assistance. The physical therapy room at the rehabilitation center smelled of antiseptic and determination. Melissa, his therapist, stood ready to catch him, but Tom waved her off. 20 steps today," he said, gripping his cane. "That's the goal." Margaret watched from her chair by the window, knitting needles working steadily on the blanket that had grown to nearly full size. 3 colors woven together, blue, green, and red. Tom had cried when he first saw it, understanding immediately what it meant. David wasn't forgotten. David was woven into their continuing story. Tom made it 23 steps before his legs shook too badly to continue. But he was smiling, really smiling. And Emma captured it on her phone, the first photo of her father looking genuinely happy in 20 years. Emma came after her shifts now, 3 or 4 times a week. At first, she'd watched clinically, the doctor in her cataloging his progress, but gradually She'd started participating, helping with exercises, steadying him when he wobbled, celebrating each small victory as if it were a miracle, which, in a way, it was. They didn't talk much during these sessions, but they were together, learning a new language of presence without pressure. Tom asked about her day. Emma asked about his pain levels, small words, building blocks of a relationship they were constructing, one careful stone at a time. How was work? Tom asked one afternoon, toweling sweat from his face. Long, lost a patient, 72-year-old man, heart attack. Emma's voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly. I'm sorry, sweetheart. He reminded me of you. Same age, same stubborn refusal to admit anything was wrong until it was almost too late. She looked at her father. His family didn't get a second chance. Tom reached for her hand. But we did. That's what matters now. 3 months after the surgery, on a crisp November afternoon, the family returned to the house by Lake Lure. Tom moved slowly, leaning on his cane, but he moved. Margaret walked beside him, her hand on his elbow, and Emma followed, carrying the metal box that had lived in the workshop for so long. They went to the workshop together, Tom's sanctuary, his hiding place, the room where he'd spent decades avoiding the life happening around him. But it looked different now. Tom had been working during his visits home between therapy sessions, and the change was remarkable. The dark corners were cleaned out. New photographs covered the walls. Emma's medical school graduation, Margaret's 60th birthday party, David's high school senior portrait where he was actually smiling. The old photos of Tom's unit remained, but they were joined by images of life, of family, of the years after the war. On the workbench sat a half-built rocking chair, beautiful wood carefully joined, each piece testament to patience and love. I'm making this for your mother, Tom said, running his hand along the smooth armrest for the porch, so we can sit together and watch the sunset in the light. No more hiding in dark rooms. Emma touched the chair, feeling the grain of the wood. It's beautiful. Dad, will you help me finish it? I'll teach you. We have time now. They worked together that afternoon, Tom showing Emma how to sand with the grain, how to test the joints, how to see the finished piece in the raw wood. Margaret brought them lemonade and watched from the doorway, hardly daring to believe this was real. Her husband and daughter, working side by side, actually talking. As the sun lowered, Tom set down his sandpaper and looked at Emma. I need to say something. Emma put down her tools, giving him her full attention. I'm sorry I wasn't the father you deserved. I'm sorry I was so afraid of breaking you that I never let you close enough to love properly. Dad, you were the father I needed. I just didn't understand that until now. But I should have been present. I should have taught you how to handle pain instead of how to hide from it. Tom's voice broke. I was so afraid you'd turn out like me, like David, that I pushed you away. And in pushing you away, I made you exactly what I feared, alone, distant, afraid of love. Emma's eyes filled with tears. But I'm learning. We're both learning. I want to tell you things, Tom said, about Vietnam, about David, about all the years in between, not all at once, but over time. Will you listen? Will you listen to me too? About my divorce? About being scared I'm like you? About wanting kids but being terrified I'll mess them up the way we got messed up? Tom pulled his daughter into a hug, the first real embrace they'd shared in years. Yes, to all of it. We'll figure it out together. That's what families do. That evening, they gathered around the dinner table for the first time as a complete family in years. Margaret had made cornbread, not burned this time, and pot roast with vegetables from the farmer's market. Tom set the table slowly, moving with the careful precision of someone still healing. He paused, then added a fourth plate. Emma saw it, understood. For David. Tom nodded. He's still part of this family. Always will be. They held hands for grace, something they hadn't done since Emma was a child. Tom led it, his voice steady. Thank you for this food, this family, this second chance, for Margaret's patience that I never deserved, for Emma's forgiveness that I'm still learning to accept, for David's memory that reminds us why presence matters, and for bringing me home. Finally, amen. The meal was filled with real conversation. Emma talked about a difficult case at the hospital, asking her father's advice, not because he was a doctor, but because he understood difficult decisions. Tom shared a story from his veterans support group, the one Dr. Sullivan had recommended, and Tom had finally joined. There's a guy there, Jimmy, served in Iraq same time as David. He talked about the guilt of surviving when his best friend didn't. Tom's voice was careful. I told him about David. First time I've said my son's name out loud in that context in 20 years. Margaret's hand found his across the table. How did it feel? Like I could finally breathe. Tom looked at both of them. All these years, I thought talking about the pain would make it real, but it was already real. The silence just made it impossible to heal. After dinner, they washed dishes together, Tom drying despite his trembling hands, Emma washing, Margaret putting away. The radio played softly, and when You Send Me came on, Tom set down his towel and extended his hand to Margaret. They slow danced in the kitchen, awkward and beautiful, Tom leaning on her for a support, both physical and emotional. Emma watched, smiling, until Tom extended his other hand to her. She joined them, and all three swayed together to the music of family learning how to be whole again. As darkness fell, Tom led Emma back to the workshop. He lit the overhead light, pushing back shadows. I don't want this to be a hiding place anymore, he said. I want it to be where I build things, where I create instead of avoid. He showed her his latest project, a small wooden box with careful dovetail joints, still unfinished. What's it for? Emma asked. For you, for your hopes, your dreams, the things you want to say but are afraid to. He handed her sandpaper. We'll finish it together, and when we do, you'll write down one fear and put it inside. Then we'll build something new on top of it. That's how we move forward. We don't forget the pain. We build on it. They worked until the stars came out, father and daughter, learning the language of wood and grain and patience. Margaret brought them coffee and sat on the workshop steps, watching her family slowly, carefully put themselves back together. Later that night, Tom stood on the porch with Margaret, looking at the lake, reflecting moonlight. The birdhouse they'd finished for David hung in the oak tree, and as they watched, a blue jay landed on it, singing into the darkness. Do you think he knows? Emma asked from the doorway. Tom smiled. I think he's been trying to tell us all along. Some things don't need words. Margaret leaned into her husband, and he wrapped his arm around her, no longer flinching from touch. Welcome home, Tom, she whispered. "Welcome home," he replied. And for the first time in 53 years, he meant it. The war was finally over. The silence was finally broken. The healing had finally begun. They stood together under the stars, a family that had almost been lost to silence, now found in the courage to speak. The bullet was gone, the infection healed, but the scars remained visible reminders that survival isn't the same as living, and that coming home means more than crossing an ocean. It means opening doors you've kept locked. It means speaking truths you've kept silent. It means letting people love you even when you don't feel worthy. Tom Whitmore had carried a bullet for 53 years, not just in his back, but in his heart. The wound wasn't the metal, it was the silence. But silence, like bullets, can be removed. And on the other side of that pain is something precious: family, forgiveness, and the freedom to finally, truly come home. Sometimes the heaviest burdens aren't the ones we can see. Tom Whitmore carried a bullet in his back for 53 years, but the real weight was the silence he wrapped around it. How many of us carry our own invisible wounds, convinced that speaking them aloud will burden the people we love? We think silence protects our families, but it only teaches them to carry pain alone. Tom's story reminds us that it's never too late to come home, not to a place, but to the people who've been waiting for us all along. His wife Margaret waited 46 years for the truth, not because she didn't love him, but because she loved him enough to respect his walls. His daughter Emma spent 20 years angry at his distance, never understanding that his silence was fear, not indifference. When that bullet was finally removed, something else was extracted too: the belief that being vulnerable means being weak. The greatest gift we can give our families isn't our strength, it's our honesty, our willingness to say, "I'm scared, I'm hurt, I need help," because healing begins when silence ends. What burden have you been carrying alone that your family deserves to help you bear? When did you realize that asking for help was actually the bravest thing you could do? Share your story in the comments below. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.